Okay, we're looking at question 2, and a close look at the question tells us to follow along with the principle in the underlying argument. Okay, so immediately we're thinking, is the principle valid, or is the argument valid or not valid? We're not told that. It's a bit of a concern, but we go forward. And so what do we have going on in this argument? We basically got a situation where we got this this plant that generates waste. Okay, and there's been pollution going on, and the CEO or whoever it is comes out and says, look, we know that we created it, we understand that, and in most situations we would be responsible. However, we have hired an independent contractor, which means basically another business from time immemorial, from the very beginning of all this, to take care of the pollution. Basically, in a nutshell, we've been able to wash our hands. We have a justifiable reason for washing our hands from this pollution because we, in good faith, have paid somebody to take care of this. Therefore, we are not responsible for this. All right. So, when we're looking at this, what's going on here? It's we should be responsible. You can blame us, but we have a justifiable reason to blame somebody else. There's somebody else to take responsibility for it. So as we're going through these answer choices, we need to determine whether or not there's blame being placed and whether there's a justifiable reason to remove the blame from the obvious party and place it on another individual. Okay, so if we look at A, it basically says that a survey has revealed that teachers are teaching students and these teachers didn't have formal training for these specific subjects that they're teaching. And then it kind of concludes by saying, therefore, parents need to check into the credentials of these teachers. All right, well, we're not doing any blame here. If it had like another statement that said something to the effect, therefore, teachers are not to blame if they do a poor job because, like, for whatever reason, parents can check out the credentials of teachers and move these kids into another class, that would be a lot more in conformity to the stimulus. But A isn't doing that at all. It's not really assigning blame. It's just saying, you know what, teachers aren't teaching subjects they know about, and parents can find out about it. Okay, but where do we go from there? We don't have, this notion of blame or responsible parties. Okay, so A is not the correct answer. B, okay, we've got this policy, parents raise kids, and anything that kids do, parents are responsible for. So if your kid, goes and throws a rock into a car, as a parent, even though you had taught them differently and done everything else, you're not, you as a parent are responsible, and this person is objecting to that. So here we've got this notion of should be responsible, all right? Now, the first thing this argument does is it starts talking about adolescent kids. So we've gotten beyond the 2-year-old that is kind of like almost involuntary to these older kids that are doing something. All right, now what is the reason why we're objecting to this? Because kids are independent. They're free thinkers. They have the ability to control themselves. All right, this is akin to this independent contractor. An independent contractor is no longer an employee. He is part of a different company. He's independent to do what he will. So that's all jiving together. We have, parents should be responsible, but because these adolescent kids have free will, they really shouldn't be. And then this last part, this kind of implicit notion that it's kind of even against the wishes of the parents. And that's what's going on also up here with regard to the plant. Okay, it paid somebody to take care of the pollution. Implicitly, it doesn't want the pollution either. So these two arguments align very, very closely, and B is the correct answer to the question. Of course, we would need to read everything, but that's a very strong candidate, and as it turns out, it is the answer. Let's look at C. So students are objecting to a reading assignment, okay, and that's because many of the topics concern material not covered in class, so we're being assigned reading regarding material that's not covered in class. And therefore students should not be required to do such reading in order to do well in the course. Okay, so we don't really have this blame thing going on. All right, that should be your first indication that that's not the right thing. And then the other thing that doesn't really make sense with regard to this argument, it kind of loses validity altogether. Which if an argument is invalid or its validity is called into question, and the stimulus is not, that is a way that you can distinguish it. So another way that you can distinguish it is just because this material is not covered in class does not mean that it's not going to be on the final. Okay, so what they're arguing is that it has to show up in class in order for things that aren't in class you're not responsible for, and that shouldn't be conducive to whether or not you do well on a final. Well, I mean, just in general, when you're in college, oftentimes it's the things that aren't discussed in class that really distinguish the grades. So C doesn't really place blame, and it has its own its own set of and it's invalid. Okay, so it's kind of the way that I would distinguish that one. Okay, D deals with this idea of what I'd call the in argument. So we can't really trust this person because one of his family members is involved. So it's kind of like he's in on a ring, or it's basically questioning the validity of a decision because some sort of family member or some sort of person in a position of authority is affiliated with this person. Well, our argument is not in any way, shape, or form doing that, so this D should easily fall out. And then E really talks about the idea of catching somebody in a lie. This politician talks about he just arrived back from a place, but I've talked to a bunch of people that were in that place and they never even saw him. Okay, that is in no way what our argument is trying to get at, so E should also be easily eliminated.